The world saw Victoria Sterling as an empress, forged in steel and glass, the CEO of a titan of industry who commanded boardrooms with an icy calm. But on a crisp autumn afternoon, in the humble kingdom of a public playground, she was just a mother. Her empire was a silent 5-year-old girl named Clara, whose voice had been stolen by tragedy 2 years prior. Victoria watched her daughter, a solitary figure by the sandbox, her eyes full of stories she could not tell. Every silent moment was a fresh wound in Victoria's heart, and then a man and his boisterous son shattered the quiet, and in the space of a single heartbeat, Victoria Sterling's carefully constructed world was about to freeze crack and be remade by the first word her daughter had spoken in 7 of 32 days. Victoria Sterling's life was a symphony of controlled precision. Her days were orchestrated in 15-minute increments by Genevieve, her hyper-efficient executive assistant. Her penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side was a testament to minimalist austerity, gleaming chrome stark white walls and glass panels that offered a panoramic yet detached view of New York City. It was less a home and more a gallery, a space curated to reflect power and discipline, not the messy, unpredictable nature of life, or for that matter of childhood. But within this sterile perfection lived an anarchic silence. It emanated from her daughter, Clara. Clara, with her father's warm chestnut hair and her mother's piercing sapphire eyes, was the one variable Victoria could not control. 2 years ago, on a rain-slicked road in the Hamptons, a screech of tires had irrevocably altered their lives. Victoria had been on a business call in the back seat. Her husband Richard had been driving. Clara, strapped into her car seat, had witnessed everything. She had seen the impact, heard the shattering glass, and watched the life drain from her father's eyes. Since that day, not a single word had passed her lips. Selective mutism, the specialists called it. Dr. Anya Sharma, a therapist whose fees were as astronomical as the Sterling Innovations stock price, explained it as a fortress of silence built by a traumatized mind. She has a voice, Victoria Dr. Sharma had said in their last session, her tone gentle but firm. She has just forgotten how to open the door. You need to stop trying to force the lock. You need to show her a world where she might want to step outside on her own. The advice had stung. Victoria's entire career was built on forcing locks, on breaking down doors. She acquired companies, dismantled inefficiencies, and forged new paths through sheer force of will. But with her own daughter, her power was useless. The guilt was a constant, corrosive presence. She had been on a business call. While her husband was dying, she had been closing a deal. Had she missed his last words? Had Clara called out for her? Her last childish cry before the silence descended. The questions haunted her sleepless nights, the only unscheduled time in her life. Dr. Sharma's latest prescription was disarmingly simple. Take her to a public park. Not a private manicured garden. A real noisy, chaotic public park. Let her be around other children. No expectations. Just be a mother. And so on this Tuesday afternoon, Victoria had cancelled a meeting with a consortium of Japanese investors, an act that had nearly given Genevieve a panic attack and driven them to Willow Creek Park. It was a sprawling expanse of green, nestled between brownstone-lined streets, a world away from the curated perfection of her life. The air smelled of damp earth and roasting chestnuts from a street vendor's cart. The sounds were a cacophony of children's laughter, distant traffic, and the rhythmic squeak of swing sets. It was everything her home was not alive, unpredictable, and loud. Clara clung to her mother's hand, her small body tense. She watched the other children with an unnerving intensity, her gaze flitting from a group of boys playing soccer to a pair of girls giggling on the swings. She was an observer, a ghost in the vibrant tapestry of childhood. Victoria led her to a quiet corner near the sandbox, where Clara sat, and began to methodically arrange pebbles in a perfect line, a familiar, self-soothing ritual. Victoria sat on a nearby bench, the polished leather of her briefcase a stark contrast to the worn wooden slats. She tried to follow Dr. Sharma's advice to simply be. But her mind was a whirlwind. She mentally reviewed the talking points for the rescheduled meeting, dissected a flaw in a recent earnings report, and planned a strategy for an upcoming hostile takeover bid. It was her armor, her defense against the profound sense of failure that gnawed at her whenever she looked at her silent child. She felt the judgment of the other parents. They saw the severe cut of her Tom Ford suit, the discreet shimmer of her Cartier watch, and the tense line of her jaw. They saw a woman who didn't belong as CEO playing dress-up as a mother. A few women from her own social circle were there, their conversations a low hum of nannies, Hamptons rentals and school admissions. They offered polite, distant smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Victoria was an anomaly, a widow, a single mother by tragedy, and a woman who wielded more corporate power than all their husbands combined. She was respected, feared, but not welcomed. An hour bled into another. Clara hadn't moved her line of pebbles now, a complex geometric pattern in the sand. Victoria's hope, a fragile flicker to begin with, was beginning to die. This was a mistake. Clara wasn't ready. Or worse, Victoria wasn't the right person to help her. Maybe she should hire a specialist, a normalcy coach, to do this for her. The thought was as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. Just as she was gathering her things, ready to retreat to the sterile safety of their penthouse, a new sound cut through the park's familiar chorus. It was a deep, warm laugh, followed by the high-pitched giggles of a young boy. A man and a child silhouetted against the sinking sun walked towards the play structure near their sandbox. The man was tall and lean, dressed in worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt, a stark contrast to Victoria's tailored armor. His son, a whirlwind of energy with a mop of unruly blonde hair, was chattering a mile a minute, pointing at the tallest slide. Victoria watched them, an unexpected pang of something hitting her chest. It wasn't quite envy. It was more like observing a species in its natural habitat, a species she had forgotten how to belong to. The man swung his son up onto his shoulders, and the boy's shrieks of delight were pure, unadulterated joy. Clara looked up from her pebbles, her tiny hands stilled. For the first time all afternoon, her focus shifted from her internal world to the external one. Her sapphire eyes, so often clouded with a distant sorrow, fixed on the laughing boy. A flicker of interest, of curiosity crossed her face. Victoria held her breath. It was nothing, she told herself, a momentary distraction. But as the man set his son down and the boy made a beeline for the climbing frame right next to the sandbox, Victoria felt an unfamiliar tremor of possibility. The man followed his movements, easy and relaxed. He sat on the edge of the sandbox, not 10 feet from where Victoria was sitting, and a scent of sawdust and fresh air drifted over to her. He smiled a general friendly smile in her direction, a simple acknowledgement of a shared space. Victoria, caught off guard, gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod in return, then immediately looked away, her defenses snapping back into place. The stage was set. The characters were in place. The quiet order of Victoria's world and the profound silence of her daughters was about to be irrevocably broken. The man's name was Daniel Peterson, though Victoria didn't know that yet. To her he was simply the father, a walking embodiment of everything she felt she was not. He exuded a warmth that seemed to radiate from him, a comfortable ease with the chaos of parenthood. His son Noah was a human firecracker, all boundless energy and fearless curiosity. "Okay, buddy," Daniel said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "The dragon's castle awaits. Just remember the rule, no jumping from the highest tower until you've learned to fly." Noah giggled a bright, infectious sound. "But I can fly, Dad. I just need a running start." He scrambled up the ladder of the large, multi-level play structure, his small sneakers thudding against the plastic rungs. Daniel watched him, a fond, easy smile on his face. He leaned back on his hands, a stark contrast to Victoria's ramrod straight posture on the opposite bench. His gaze drifted around the playground and settled for a moment without lingering on the small, quiet girl, meticulously arranging her stones. He saw her, but his look held no judgment, only a gentle curiosity. Then he looked at Victoria, and for a split second their eyes met again. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the fierce, protective energy coiled within her. He saw a woman holding a fragile world together with sheer force of will. He offered another small, unassuming smile before turning his attention back to his son. Victoria felt the encounter like a physical touch, an unwelcome intrusion into her carefully guarded space. She bristled annoyed at his casual friendliness, and even more annoyed at her own reaction to it. She was Victoria Sterling. She negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching. Why did a simple smile from a stranger in a park feel so disarming? Noah, having reached the top of the structure, was now navigating a wobbly rope bridge. He moved with the reckless confidence of a 5-year-old, his arms out for balance. He was chattering to himself, a running commentary on his grand adventure. And now Sir Noah crosses the treacherous canyon. Below him there are crocodiles and lava. Clara had completely abandoned her pebbles. Her head was tilted, her blue eyes wide, tracking Noah's every move. It was the most engaged Victoria had seen her in years. She was utterly captivated. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her lips as Noah pretended to stumble dramatically on the bridge. Victoria's heart did a painful little flip. Hope. It was a dangerous, treacherous thing. She had tried so hard to extinguish it, to replace it with practical therapies and measurable progress. But here it was, bubbling up, ignited by the laughter of a strange boy. "Hey." The voice was bright and clear. Noah, having successfully navigated the bridge, was now leaning over the railing, looking directly down at Clara. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice full of genuine, uncomplicated curiosity. Clara froze. Her small smile vanished. She looked from Noah down to her hands in her lap, her whole body seeming to shrink into itself. The invisible walls of her fortress shot up thick and impenetrable. Victoria's muscles tensed. She was about to stand to intervene, to shield her daughter from this well-meaning but painful intrusion. This was the moment she always dreaded, when the world demanded something Clara could not give, and the subsequent awkwardness and pity would descend. But Daniel was already moving. He didn't stand up, but he shifted his position, speaking to his son in a calm, gentle tone. "Noah, that's not how we meet new friends. We give them space. Why don't you show her how you can go down the twisty slide?" It was a masterful deflection offered without a hint of condescension. It gave Clara an out, reframing the interaction from a demand to an invitation. Noah easily redirected, beamed. "Okay, watch this. It's the fastest slide in the whole world." He disappeared from the railing, and a moment later shot out of the bottom of the yellow spiral slide, landing in a heap in the wood chips with a triumphant laugh. He scrambled to his feet, brushing himself off, and looked at Clara expectantly, his face beaming with pride. Clara watched him, her expression unreadable. She didn't run, she didn't hide. She simply watched. Noah, undeterred by her silence, seemed to accept it as part of the game. He saw a playmate, not a problem to be solved. He grabbed a small red pail and shovel from the edge of the sandbox. He walked over to Clara, not too close, and began to dig a hole a few feet away from her line of pebbles. He hummed to himself, occasionally glancing at her, a silent invitation in his actions. He wasn't asking for her voice. He was just sharing the space. Daniel watched the scene unfold, a quiet approval in his eyes. He caught Victoria's gaze once more, and this time his smile was one of shared understanding. A silent acknowledgement of the delicate dance of parenting. Against her better judgment, Victoria felt the tension in her own shoulders ease just a fraction. The next few minutes passed in a strange, peaceful quiet between the two children. Noah dug and hummed. Clara watched her hand still in her lap. Then, slowly, tentatively, she reached out and picked up a single smooth white pebble. She held it for a moment, then placed it carefully at the edge of the hole Noah was digging. Noah stopped digging. He looked at the pebble, then at Clara. A huge grin spread across his face. A treasure. The crocodile lava monster has a treasure. He carefully picked up the pebble and placed it in his pail. Thank you. Clara's lips parted slightly. Her eyes were locked on Noah. This was it. This was the connection Dr. Sharma had talked about. A communication that transcended words. Tears pricked at the back of Victoria's eyes. She willed herself to remain still, to not shatter the fragile magic of the moment. Noah, emboldened, went back to his adventures. He decided to climb the rock wall on the side of the play structure this time. It was a more challenging route with small, awkwardly placed handholds. "Watch me, Dad," he called out. "I'm going all the way to the top. I'm watching Spider-Man." Daniel called back, his tone light, but his eyes were sharp and focused, tracking his son's progress. Noah was halfway up, his small face scrunched in concentration. He reached for a high handhold, his fingers stretching. At the same time, his right foot slipped on the smooth plastic rock. For a horrifying, heart-stopping second, his body swung outward, his grip maintained only by one straining hand. Time seemed to slow down. Daniel lunged to his feet, a shout of Noah catching in his throat. Victoria's breath hitched her body rigid with alarm. But before either adult could react, another sound pierced the air. It was small, a little rough from disuse, but it was unmistakably a voice. Careful, the word shot out like a startled bird. Victoria froze, every muscle in her body locking into place. Her head snapped toward her daughter. Clara was standing, her small hands clasped in front of her mouth, her eyes wide, with a mixture of terror for Noah and shock at herself. The sound had come from her own lips. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The cacophony of the park, the laughter, the swings, the traffic all faded into a distant hum. The only thing Victoria could hear was the echo of that single miraculous word. A word she hadn't heard her daughter speak in 2 years. A word spoken not for her, not for a therapist, but for a little boy she had just met. Noah, startled by the shout, had found his footing. He was now clinging safely to the wall. Daniel was already there, his hands protectively on his son's back, helping him down. But Victoria couldn't move. She was paralyzed, staring at her daughter. Tears she had held back for 2 years finally broke free, blurring the image of the little girl who had just found her voice to save a friend. She was frozen in a moment of pure, agonizing, beautiful shock. The Empress was gone. In her place was just a mother witnessing a miracle. The world rushed back in a torrent of sensation. Daniel had Noah safely on the ground, checking him over with frantic, gentle hands. "Are you okay, buddy? Did you get scared?" Noah, more surprised than hurt, nodded, his eyes wide. "I slipped, but I'm okay." He looked over at Clara, who was now staring at her own hands, as if they had betrayed her. "Did you hear that?" he asked his dad in a loud whisper. The girl talked. The spell was broken. The miracle had a witness. Victoria's paralysis shattered, and a chaotic storm of emotion took its place: elation, panic fear, and a fierce primal surge of possession. She moved, crossing the few feet to Clara in 2 quick strides. She knelt, her hands hovering over her daughter's shoulders, afraid to touch her, as if Clara were a delicate piece of glass that might shatter. Clara Honey Victoria's voice was a ragged whisper. "Did you? You just spoke. Can you say it again? Can you say Mama?" It was the wrong thing to do. The desperate plea, the sudden intensity was too much. Clara looked up at her mother, her eyes swimming with fear and confusion. The shock of hearing her own voice, of breaking a 2-year vow of silence, was overwhelming. She saw the tears on her mother's face, felt the weight of her expectation, and the fragile door that had momentarily creaked open, slammed shut, and was double-bolted. She began to tremble, a silent sob shaking her small frame, and buried her face in Victoria's suit jacket, her refuge from a world that had suddenly become too loud. Victoria's heart plummeted from dizzying heights to a familiar, aching abyss. She had pushed too hard. In her moment of overwhelming joy, she had scared her daughter back into her shell. The guilt was instantaneous and suffocating. Daniel approached them cautiously, Noah holding tightly to his hand. "Is she all right?" he asked, his voice low and full of genuine concern. "I'm so sorry my son can be a bit of a daredevil. Thank you. To your daughter." She gave him a good warning. Victoria looked up at him, her vision blurred by tears. In her disoriented state, his kindness felt like an accusation. His son was the reason for this. This whole messy, emotional cataclysm was because of them. It was an irrational thought born of panic, but it took hold. She needed to regain control. She needed to get Clara away, back to the sterile silence of their apartment, where she could analyze what had just happened. "She's fine," Victoria said, her voice clipped and cold, the old armor of the CEO snapping back into place. She scooped a trembling Clara into her arms, grabbing her handbag from the bench in one fluid motion. "We have to go." She turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving Daniel and Noah standing in the wood chips, looking after her with bewildered expressions. Dad Noah asked quietly, "Why is that lady crying? And why did the girl get sad after she talked?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked at the perfect, intricate line of pebbles by the sandbox, a silent testament to the little girl's carefully ordered world, a world they had just inadvertently sent crashing down. "I don't know, buddy," he said softly. I think maybe she just forgot how loud her own voice was." The journey home was a blur for Victoria. She drove on autopilot, her mind replaying the moment over and over. Careful. The sound of it. The pitch. The clarity. It was real. It had happened. But now the silence in the car was heavier, more profound than ever before. It was no longer a passive absence of sound. It was an active, stubborn refusal. Back in the penthouse, the silence was deafening. Victoria set Clara down on the plush white sofa. The little girl immediately curled into a ball, pulling a cashmere throw over her head. Victoria wanted to scream, to cry, to shake the walls. Instead, she took a deep breath, smoothing down her suit, and fell back on the only method she knew: strategy. She called Dr. Sharma. "It's a breakthrough, Victoria, a monumental one," the therapist exclaimed over the phone after Victoria recounted the story. The trigger was external, an empathetic response to perceived danger. It bypassed the psychological block. This is wonderful news. It doesn't feel wonderful. Anya Victoria said, her voice tight. She's retreated completely. It's like she's built a fortress inside the fortress. I can't reach her. That's to be expected, Dr. Sharma soothed. Imagine you haven't used a muscle in 2 years. The first time you flex it, it's going to be shocking, maybe even painful. The sound of her own voice probably frightened her as much as Noah's potential fall. The important thing is not to pressure her. We let her process this. But Victoria, that little boy, Noah, he's the key. He created a low-pressure social environment where she felt safe enough to connect non-verbally, and then a high-stakes emotional environment that prompted her to connect verbally. We need to find him. The call ended, leaving Victoria with a clear, singular objective. It was a familiar feeling, a relief, a problem with a tangible solution. Find the man and his son. She walked over to the window, looking down at the city lights twinkling to life as dusk settled. For the first time, her mission wasn't about market share or stock prices. It was about a boy named Noah and his father, a man in a flannel shirt who smelled of sawdust. And then a chilling realization hit her. She had been so consumed by her own panic that she hadn't asked for his name. She hadn't even properly thanked him. She had no idea who he was or where he lived. He was a ghost, a fleeting presence in a public park. She had spent her entire adult life building an empire, a network of contacts and resources that could locate anyone, acquire anything. Now all that power had to be focused on one seemingly impossible task, finding a single father and his son in a city of 8 million people with no name, no address, and nothing to go on but a brief encounter that had changed everything. The echo of that one precious word, careful, hung in the silent apartment, a promise of what could be, and a testament to how far she still had to go. The search was on, and Victoria Sterling never ever failed a mission. The next morning, the command center of Sterling Innovations was retasked. Genevieve, whose skills in corporate espionage and data mining were legendary, was given a new top priority file. It contained no financial projections or market analysis. It contained a single concise directive: locate the man and boy from Willow Creek Park. The description was frustratingly vague. Man late 30s, tall, lean build, brown hair, friendly demeanor, dressed in jeans and flannel. Son approximately 5 years old, named Noah, blonde, energetic. That's it, Genevieve asked, her perfectly plucked eyebrow raised. No last name, no mention of what he does for a living. You didn't happen to get a license plate or overhear a school name? Victoria's jaw tightened. If I had that information, Genevieve, I wouldn't need you. He smelled of wood. Like a carpenter, maybe. It was a flimsy clue, but it was all she had. For the next week, Victoria's life was split in two. By day, she was the imperious CEO, chairing meetings, making ruthless decisions, and projecting an aura of unshakable control. But every afternoon, from 3 to 5 o'clock, she would shed her corporate skin and become the woman on the park bench. She returned to Willow Creek Park every single day. She sat on the same bench, her briefcase by her side, a silent sentinel watching the playground's ebb and flow. She became a strange fixture, the woman in the suit. The other mothers who had once offered her chilly smiles now watched her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They whispered amongst themselves. Why was this powerful woman here day after day, her eyes scanning every face, a deep, hungry look in her eyes? Clara sat beside her, sometimes listless, sometimes building her pebble fortresses. She never looked at the play structure. It was as if the memory was too much the space now haunted by the ghost of her own voice. Victoria's heart ached with every passing silent hour. The miraculous breakthrough felt less like a beginning and more like a cruel, fleeting glimpse of a world she couldn't access. Meanwhile, Genevieve deployed a discreet, methodical search. She had security analysts pull public camera footage from the streets surrounding the park, hoping to spot the man and his son. She cross-referenced local school enrollments for a 5-year-old named Noah with blonde hair. She even had a private investigator, a former NYPD detective, spend his days at the park, casually chatting with nannies and parents, fishing for information. The city, for all its interconnectedness, held its secrets tightly. The camera footage was a dead end, too many people, too many angles. There were dozens of boys named Noah in the local school districts. The investigator came back with nothing but playground gossip. As the days turned into a week, then too a cold tendril of desperation began to snake around Victoria's heart. What if she never found them? What if that one word was all she would ever get? The thought was unbearable. Simultaneously, a major professional storm was brewing, one that Victoria was only peripherally aware of. Sterling Innovations had a massive urban renewal project underway in Brooklyn, codenamed Project Phoenix. It was a multi-billion-dollar plan to build a state-of-the-art tech campus, a gleaming monument to the future. To do so, the company had acquired an entire city block of old low-rise buildings in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. The legal department had assured her it was all straightforward. The tenants were on month-to-month leases, the buyouts were fair by market standards, and the eviction notices had been served. Victoria had signed off on the preliminary plans months ago and delegated the messy details to her acquisitions team. Her focus was on the bigger picture, the architecture, the financing, the long-term vision. She was vaguely aware of some minor resistance. Genevieve had mentioned a small group of artisans and small business owners who were protesting, refusing the buyout offers. A handful of holdouts, her legal chief had called them. "We'll handle it. They'll be gone by the end of the month." Victoria had dismissed it as a standard cost of doing business. Progress always had its casualties. Unbeknownst to her, Daniel Peterson was one of those casualties. His woodworking studio, Peterson and Son Custom Furniture, was the heart of that small community of artisans. It wasn't just his business, it was his legacy. He had built it with his late wife, sanding and finishing pieces late into the night while she sketched new designs. The son in the name was for Noah, the future he was building. The eviction notice from Sterling Innovations felt like a death sentence for that dream. For the past month, Daniel had been organizing the other tenants, a glass blower, a ceramicist, a bookbinder. They wrote letters they called local politicians. They started a petition. He was the reluctant leader of their small rebellion, fighting against a faceless corporate behemoth. He had no idea the name on the letterhead, Victoria Sterling CEO, belonged to the sad, beautiful woman from the park. He thought of her often. The image of her frozen face, the tears tracking down her cheeks as she held her daughter, was seared into his memory. He felt a strange kinship with her, a recognition of the profound loneliness of single parenthood, the heavy weight of a child's silent pain. He'd often look for her when he and Noah played in other parks, wondering if he would ever see them again, if the little girl had ever spoken another word. The breakthrough in Victoria's search came from the most unlikely of sources, a street vendor. The man who sold roasted chestnuts near the park entrance, a grizzled old man named Al, was a fixture of the neighborhood. The private investigator, on his last day before giving up, bought a bag of chestnuts and showed Al a discreet photo of Daniel. He'd had an artist's sketch based on Victoria's description. "Oh yeah, I know that guy. Al said, his voice raspy. Danny. Comes by with his kid Noah a couple times a week. Not so much lately, though. Said he's been busy with some trouble at his workshop. The investigator's heart hammered. Workshop, you know where it is? Sure, Al said, scooping chestnuts into a small paper bag. Over in Brooklyn, on Water Street. A real nice place, makes furniture. A shame they're tearing it all down for some big glass box. The investigator's blood ran cold. He knew about Project Phoenix. He knew that block. He paid for the chestnuts, his mind racing. He called Genevieve immediately. Genevieve took the information directly to Victoria, her face pale. She walked into the CEO's office, closing the door softly behind her. Victoria was staring out the window, a now familiar ritual. We found him, Genevieve said quietly. Victoria spun around, a blaze of hope in her eyes. Well, what's his name? Genevieve hesitated, placing a folder on the polished mahogany desk. His name is Daniel Peterson. He's a custom furniture maker. She paused, taking a deep breath. Victoria, his workshop is at 14 Water Street. It's in the center of the Project Phoenix demolition zone. He's the lead petitioner on the lawsuit filed against us last week. The hope in Victoria's eyes died, replaced by a stunned, horrified disbelief. The man who held the key to her daughter's voice, the warm, kind father from the park, was the man her company was about to bulldoze into oblivion. The ghost she had been desperately searching for was the enemy at her gate. The revelation struck Victoria with the force of a physical blow. She sank into her leather chair, the air leaving her lungs in a silent rush. Daniel Peterson. The name echoed in the vast, quiet office. For weeks he had been a faceless obstacle, a line item in a legal brief labeled Holdout Tenant 1. Now he had a face, a son, a warm laugh, and a faded flannel shirt that smelled of wood. And he was the man who had made her daughter speak. Her worlds, so deliberately and carefully separated, had just collided with the devastating force of a tectonic shift. The cold, calculating world of sterling innovations and the deeply personal, vulnerable world of Clara's mother had become one and the same. The conflict was no longer abstract. It was Daniel Peterson. Get me the complete Project Phoenix file, she told Genevieve, her voice low and steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside her. Every document, every email, every complaint filed by the tenants. For the next hour, Victoria immersed herself in the cold, hard facts of the deal. She read the eviction notices, the legal language, sterile and merciless. She saw the buyout offers which, while technically market rate, were a pittance for artisans who had poured their lives into their workshops. She read the internal memos from her legal team, dismissing the tenants as sentimentalists and a minor nuisance. With each page a knot of ice formed in her stomach. She saw her own signature on the bottom of the initial acquisition order. She was the architect of this. She was the faceless corporation that was destroying this man's life, the very man who represented her only hope. The legal team strongly advises against any direct contact, Genevieve said, standing by the desk like a loyal soldier. They say it could compromise the company's position in the lawsuit. Victoria looked up from a photo in the file, a grainy image of the Water Street workshops. A hand-painted sign read, Peterson and Son, Custom Furniture. Below it, a smaller, more recent sign hung in protest, Homes and dreams aren't for bulldozing. My legal team, Victoria, said, her voice, dangerously quiet, is concerned with mitigating financial risk. I am concerned with the fact that we are about to ruin the life of the only person on earth who has been able to help my daughter. She stood up, her decision made. Get the car. I'm going to Brooklyn. The drive over the bridge felt like a journey to another country. The sleek glass and steel of Manhattan gave way to the weathered brick and industrial charm of the Brooklyn waterfront. Water Street was a cobblestone lane, lined with old warehouses, their large windows hinting at the creative life within. It was a pocket of authenticity in a city rapidly being homogenized by corporate developers like her. She saw the protest signs first. They were in every window. Then she saw the workshop. It was the largest on the block, with big, beautiful windows showcasing finished pieces of furniture, a gleaming walnut dining table, a sleek maple rocking chair. Through the glass, she could see a man moving inside. It was him. Taking a breath that did little to calm her hammering heart, she stepped out of the black town car. Her severe suit and sharp heels felt utterly alien on the uneven cobblestones. As she approached the door, it swung open, and Daniel Peterson stepped out, wiping his hands on a dusty rag. He stopped short when he saw her. His eyes widened in recognition, a flicker of surprised pleasure crossing his face. "You," he said, a slow smile spreading across his lips. "The lady from the park. I was wondering if I'd ever see you again. How is your little girl?" For a moment, Victoria's resolve wavered. The warmth in his voice, the genuine concern, was disarming. She had come prepared for a confrontation, for anger. She hadn't prepared for kindness. Before she could answer, his eyes drifted past her, to the waiting town car with its polished finish and the subtle SI crest of Sterling Innovations on the hubcap. She saw the exact moment the pieces clicked into place in his mind. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of cold, dawning horror. The warmth in his eyes iced over, replaced by a steely glare of betrayal. Sterling Innovations. He said the name tasting like poison in his mouth. He looked from the car back to her impeccably tailored suit. "You're not just some mother from the park, are you?" "My name is Victoria Sterling," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The name felt like a confession. He let out a short, harsh laugh, devoid of any humor. It was a sound of pure, bitter disbelief. "Victoria Sterling, of course. The CEO. You're the one signing the papers that are throwing us out onto the street." He took a step back, shaking his head, as if trying to clear an impossible image. "All that time I actually felt sorry for you. I thought you were just another struggling parent. Mr. Peterson." "Daniel." She started taking a step forward. "Please, you have to understand. I didn't know it was you. I've been looking for you." "Looking for me?" He shot back, his voice rising with anger. "Why to serve the final eviction notice in person? To see the face of the man whose livelihood you're about to destroy? Is that part of the Sterling Innovations personal touch?" A few people from the other workshops had emerged, drawn by the raised voices. They stood at a distance, watching, their faces grim. No, Victoria insisted, her composure cracking. "It's about my daughter. Clara." "You were there." She spoke. For the first time in 2 years, she spoke because of your son. Because of Noah. Daniel stared at her, his face a mask of conflict. The anger warred with the memory of that moment in the park, of the tiny miracle of a word. But the anger won. "Don't," he seethed, his voice low and trembling with rage. "Don't you dare use your daughter as a shield for this. Don't you stand there in your $1,000 suit on the street you're about to pave over and try to manipulate me with a story about your child." He gestured around him at the weathered brick buildings, the hand-painted signs, the community he was fighting for. "This is my life. This was my wife's dream. This is my son's future. And you are taking it away with the stroke of a pen so you can build another soulless glass box. So forgive me if I'm not in the mood to help you with your parenting problems." His words hit her harder than any hostile boardroom negotiation ever had. He was right. From his perspective, She was a monster, a hypocrite of the highest order. She had come here seeking a miracle for her child while actively destroying the future for his. I'm sorry, she stammered the words, feeling pathetic and inadequate. Sorry doesn't stop the bulldozers, he said, his voice raw with pain. He looked at her one last time, his eyes full of a deep, profound disappointment that was somehow worse than his anger. I think you should leave, Ms. Sterling. He turned without another word and went back into his workshop, the door closing behind him with a definitive soul-crushing click. The sound echoed down the cobblestone street, a final resounding slam on the door of hope she thought she had finally found. Victoria stood frozen on the cobblestone street, the click of Daniel's workshop door echoing in the sudden silence. The other artisans who had gathered now stared at her with open hostility, their faces reflecting the same betrayal she had seen in Daniel's eyes. She was no longer a person to them. She was an emblem, the finely dressed embodiment of the corporate machine that was crushing them. For the first time in her professional life, Victoria Sterling fled. She turned, walked stiffly back to her car, and slid inside the plush leather, offering no comfort. The drive back to Manhattan was a silent torment. Daniel's words played on a loop in her head. Don't you dare use your daughter as a shield. Sorry doesn't stop the bulldozers. He had stripped away her title, her wealth, her power, and shown her exactly what she was in that moment, a destroyer and a hypocrite. Back in her sterile penthouse, the silence that had once been a familiar ache was now an accusation. She looked at Clara, who was sitting on the floor, building a tower with minimalist wooden blocks. Her daughter lived in a world without a voice, a world of profound silence. And what had she, Victoria, been doing? She had been building her own empire of silence, systematically quieting the voices of people like Daniel Peterson, dismissing their pleas as a minor nuisance. She was the architect of silence, both in her home and in her city. That night, sleep offered no escape. She dreamt of bulldozers made of glass, tearing down a small workshop. She dreamt of Noah, his face streaked with tears, asking her why she had taken his home. She dreamt of Clara standing in the rubble, her mouth open in a silent scream. She awoke before dawn, drenched in a cold sweat. The decision came to her with the clarity of a lightning strike. She couldn't undo the pain she had caused, but she could refuse to inflict any more. She would not be this person. She went to her home office, the city still cloaked in darkness beyond the vast windows. She pulled up the Project Phoenix files again, but this time she wasn't looking at the numbers. She was looking at the human cost. She read the tenants' letters of appeal, letters her legal team had likely scanned and dismissed. Daniel's letter was among them. It wasn't angry or litigious. It was a heartfelt plea. He wrote about the history of the building, about the community of craftspeople. He wrote about his late wife, Olivia, an artist who had fallen in love with the light from the large factory windows. He described how they had poured their savings and their souls into the workshop, how it was the one place he still felt her presence, the place where he was building a future for their son. Tears streamed down Victoria's face as she read. Here was the man from the park, his warmth and his heart laid bare on the page. She saw the parallel in their lives with a painful, startling clarity. Both widowers, both single parents, both pouring everything they had into their children, trying to build a future out of the ashes of a devastating loss. But while he was building things of beauty and substance with his hands, she had been building a fortress around her heart, acquiring and demolishing, mistaking relentless activity for genuine progress. Her grief for Richard, which she had suppressed for 2 years under a mountain of work, came flooding back. She realized her obsessive focus on the company hadn't been for Clara, as she'd told herself. It had been an escape, an anesthetic. By trying to conquer the world, she had been running from the quiet, painful reality of her own home. In her quest to control everything, she had lost control of the one thing that mattered, her own humanity. And in doing so, she had nearly snuffed out the humanity in others. A new vision began to form in her mind, a radical, audacious idea that made her heart pound with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. It was a huge risk, a move that would be seen as corporate suicide by her board of directors. But it was the only path forward. She spent the next 48 hours in a creative frenzy, working with a team of young progressive architects. She secretly brought in people she knew were hungry to challenge the corporate status quo. She didn't sleep. She barely ate. Fueled by coffee and a desperate need for redemption, she tore Project Phoenix apart and rebuilt it from the ground up. The gleaming monolithic tech campus was gone. In its place was a new design, a revolutionary concept of urban integration. The old brick workshops of Water Street were no longer an obstacle to be demolished. They were the centerpiece. The new Sterling Innovations campus would be built around them, preserving the historic facades. The artisan workshops would be subsidized, becoming the heart of a new, vibrant community. There would be public green spaces, a daycare and art gallery, showcasing the tenants' work, and a farmer's market in the cobblestone square. It was a campus that didn't just house a corporation. It fostered a community. It was a design that honored the past while building the future. It was a plan that chose integration over annihilation. 2 days later, Victoria Sterling walked into the Sterling Innovations boardroom. The portfolio with the new designs felt heavy in her hands. The board members, a formidable collection of grey-haired, stern-faced men who valued profit above all else, looked at her expectantly, ready for a routine project update. They had no idea she was about to light a fire under their entire world. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a newfound conviction. "There has been a change of plans for Project Phoenix, a complete and total revision." She laid out the new blueprints, her voice ringing with a passion they had never heard from her before. She didn't talk about ROI or profit margins. She talked about community sustainability and corporate responsibility. She talked about building a legacy, not just a building. She told them that true innovation wasn't about destroying the old to make way for the new, but about finding a way for them to coexist and enrich one another. The room was silent, stunned. The chairman of the board, a man named Philip Crane, finally spoke, his voice dripping with condescension. "Victoria, have you lost your mind? This is sentimental nonsense. We are a technology company, not a charity. This plan will cut our profit projections by 30%. "You're wrong," Philip. Victoria countered, her gaze unwavering. "This will make us the most talked-about company in the country. This will attract the best talent people who want to work for a company with a soul, not just a stock ticker. This isn't about losing profit. This is about redefining what profit is." The battle raged for hours. It was the fight of her professional life. She used every bit of her strategic acumen, her knowledge of the market, and her sheer force of will. But this time, it was fueled not by ambition, but by a deep, resonant purpose. She was fighting not just for a project, but for the kind of person she wanted to be. The kind of mother Clara deserved. In the end, by the slimmest of margins, she won. The board, cowed by her ferocity and swayed by her vision of a powerful new public image, reluctantly approved the revised plan. Victoria walked out of the boardroom, feeling exhausted, but strangely light. She had risked her empire, but she had saved a small piece of her soul. Now there was one more person she had to face. She didn't send a lawyer or an assistant. She went herself back to the cobblestone street in Brooklyn, the approved blueprints clutched in her hand. Daniel was in his workshop when he saw the black town car pull up again. His heart sank, assuming it was a final, unappealable eviction order. He braced himself as Victoria Sterling stepped out alone, this time carrying a large roll of papers. He opened the door before she could knock his posture a defensive wall. "What do you want, Ms. Sterling?" he asked, his voice flat and weary. "I want to show you something," she said quietly, her usual corporate authority gone. "May I come in?" He hesitated, then stepped aside. Victoria entered the space, her eyes briefly taking in a photo on his workbench of a smiling woman, his late wife, Olivia. She met his gaze with a look of profound understanding before unrolling the blueprints on his workbench. Daniel looked down, expecting to see the cold architecture of the tech campus. Instead, he saw something impossible. He saw his own workshop rendered in perfect detail at the very heart of the plan. He saw the studios of his fellow artisans, all preserved and integrated into a stunning design of green spaces and modern buildings that embraced the old brick warehouses. At the bottom, a title read, "The Sterling Innovations Community Campus and Artisan Collective." Stunned, he traced the lines with his finger. "What is this?" he whispered. "This is the new project Phoenix Victoria said. The board approved it this morning. We're not tearing anything down, Daniel. We're building around you. We want you all to stay." He looked up, searching her face for the catch. Why Victoria leaned against the workbench, her powerful persona stripped away. "Because you were right," she confessed. "I was building a soulless box. Since my husband Richard died in an accident, I've just been working, trying to control everything, so I wouldn't have to feel the pain. I didn't see who I was hurting. I was silencing people just as my daughter has been silenced." Her voice cracked with emotion. "I couldn't live with the hypocrisy of asking for your help while my company planned to destroy your son's future." The raw honesty of her confession shattered Daniel's anger. He saw her then not as a CEO but as a fellow traveler on the lonely road of grief. "My wife Olivia," he said, his voice husky as he gestured to the photo. "Cancer. This place. This was our dream. Something to build for our son, Noah." In the quiet of the workshop, amidst the scent of sawdust, an understanding formed between them, a bridge built of shared loss and love for their children. A week later, Victoria brought Clara back to Water Street. Daniel met them at the door, Noah hiding shyly behind his legs. Inside, Noah led Clara to a small workbench where a small, intricately carved wooden bird sat. "I made this for you," Noah said softly, "because you were like a little bird that forgot its song." Clara reached out and gently touched the bird's wing. She looked at its delicate form, then over at her mother, and then to Daniel. Finally, her eyes met Noah's. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice clear and soft. The two words filled the workshop, a miracle of sound. Tears of pure joy streamed down Victoria's face. Daniel put a steadying hand on her arm, his own eyes shining. Noah beamed, placing the bird into Clara's hands, as their children began to play their shared world, no longer silent. Victoria and Daniel stood together, having found a new foundation, not of concrete and steel, but of empathy, courage, and hope. What began on a playground as a moment of shocking silence transformed into a story of profound connection. Victoria Sterling, a CEO who commanded an empire, discovered that her greatest strength wasn't in her boardroom, but in her willingness to be vulnerable. Daniel Peterson, an artisan fighting for his legacy, found that his loudest protest was an act of quiet empathy. And a little girl named Clara, trapped in a world without words, found her voice not through therapy or pressure, but through the simple, powerful magic of a new friend. This story reminds us that beneath the suits and the struggles, the titles and the turmoil, we are all just people searching for connection. It shows us that sometimes the most revolutionary act is to stop to listen and to choose to build together rather than tear things down. If this story of how a single word rebuilt two broken families touched your heart, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need a reminder of the power of human connection. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories that prove the most valuable investments are always the ones we make in each other. Thank you for listening.